There's a strange silence that lives beneath the noise of our time. You can hear it if you close your eyes long enough. It's the silence between the clicks, the scrolls, the comments, the updates. It's the part of you that still remembers what it feels like to be human. But we've forgotten how to listen to it. We live in an age where distraction has become oxygen. Every thought must be tweeted, every feeling must be shared, and every pain must be disguised with humor or a filter. And so little by little we traded depth for stimulation, truth for validation. We don't think anymore. We react, we don't reflect, we perform. And the irony is that we call this progress. There's a kind of noise that doesn't make a sound. You don't notice it at first, but it's there, buzzing behind your thoughts, humming beneath your skin. It's the noise of the modern world, a silent frequency that keeps the human mind restless, distracted, overstimulated, and numb. We were not designed for this level of input. Thousands of images, messages, opinions, all fighting for a piece of our attention every single day. It's not just information overload, it's soul overload, and our nervous systems are collapsing under the weight of constant stimulation. They told us technology would set us free, but nobody mentioned that we'd become its slaves. We stare into glowing rectangles, chasing digital dopamine, confusing connection with consumption. Every scroll is a little hit of validation, every notification a reminder that we exist. If only for a second. We think we're in control, but we're not. The algorithm is. It knows you better than you know yourself. It studies your hesitation, your scrolling speed, your gaze. It learns what makes you stay and what makes you feel. And little by little, it shapes you. Not through force, through seduction. You're not being controlled by fear anymore. You're being controlled by comfort. That's the brilliance of the system. It doesn't have to silence you, and it just keeps you entertained. It doesn't have to take away your freedom. It just gives you too many meaningless choices. The modern cage is invisible, and the more comfortable you are, the less you notice it. We've built a world where stimulation has replaced substance. We scroll through tragedies with the same finger we use to like a photo of a sunset. We feel everything, but understand nothing. And this is the tragedy of our time. We are emotionally aware but spiritually blind. There's no stillness left, no moment of emptiness where thought can grow, because stillness feels like boredom, and boredom feels like death. But boredom is not death, it's rebirth. It's the soil where creativity grows. And we've paved it over with constant distraction. We've trained our minds to seek pleasure, not purpose, to avoid discomfort, not understand it. We label everything that hurts as toxic and everything that challenges us as negative, but growth was never meant to be comfortable. Healing doesn't come in bright colors. It comes in silence, darkness, and patience. That's why so many people are depressed and don't know why. Because depression in the modern world isn't just sadness, it's saturation. It's too much of everything and not enough meaning. We've lost the art of being alone. We fear our own company because it reveals the truth we've been running from. When you're alone without a screen, the mind starts to whisper things you don't want to hear. Why am I doing all this? Who am I when nobody's watching? What do I really want? And those questions are dangerous in a world that profits from your confusion. That's why silence has become rebellion, because a silent mind cannot be sold to. A grounded soul doesn't crave what's trending. And a person who knows themselves can't be manipulated. The system doesn't want awareness, it wants compliance. It rewards performance, not authenticity. And most people will sell their peace for applause. We measure our worth in pixels now. How many followers? How many likes? How many views? But here's the truth nobody wants to admit. You could have the whole world watching you and still feel invisible, because visibility is not the same as connection. Attention is not love, and validation is not truth. The mind has become addicted to mirrors. We define ourselves by reflection instead of reality. We look for who we are in the eyes of strangers, but the reflection is always distorted because it was never meant to define you. And so the more you chase validation, the further you drift from your core, until one day you wake up and realize you've become a stranger to your own mind. That's when the real anxiety begins, the kind that no amount of therapy, caffeine, or scrolling can fix, because deep down you know something is wrong. You can feel it in the space between moments, a quiet ache that says, this isn't real life. But how do you step out of the illusion when the illusion feels safer than reality? That's the paradox of awakening. You start to see the strings behind the puppet show, but you can't unsee them. You start noticing the manipulation in advertisements, the emptiness in entertainment, the loneliness in crowds. And part of you wishes you could go back to the bliss of ignorance. But you can't, because once the mind opens, it never fully closes again. That's why awakening is painful. It destroys your comfort zone before it gives you freedom. You start losing interest in things that used to excite you. You start craving silence instead of noise, depth instead of drama, truth instead of comfort. And the world calls it depression, but it's actually evolution. You're not broken, you're just waking up. But awakening in a sleeping world feels lonely, because now you see the games people play, the fake smiles, the polite lies, the endless pretending. You see how much of human interaction is just a performance for belonging. And you begin to realize how few people actually mean what they say. That's when disillusionment sets in. But disillusionment isn't the end, it's the beginning. It's the collapse of illusion, the crumbling of the false self. And what remains after that collapse is real, raw, imperfect, human. The modern mind has been trained to avoid this collapse. We think breakdowns are failures, but breakdowns are revelations, the psyche's way of saying, you've been living a lie. They strip away what's false, leaving only what's true. And truth, no matter how painful, is the foundation of peace. That's why silence, solitude, and simplicity are the ultimate forms of rebellion today, not because they're trendy, but because they return you to yourself. You can't hear your intuition when the world is screaming. You can't grow when every second is filled with distraction. Growth requires space, requires courage. When was the last time you gave yourself permission to be bored, to do nothing, to just sit and feel without trying to fix or improve anything? We treat rest like laziness, but rest is the restoration of the mind. You can't create a conscious world with exhausted souls. The reason most people feel empty is not because their lives lack pleasure. It's because their lives lack purpose. Pleasure fills the moment, but purpose fills the soul. And purpose only reveals itself in stillness. That's why the most dangerous person in the modern world is not the one with power. It's the one with peace. Because you can't control a peaceful mind. You can't manipulate someone who no longer needs external validation. Peace is not passive. It's powerful. It means you've seen the chaos and you've chosen not to become it. But the path to peace isn't glamorous. It's lonely, raw, and demanding. It requires you to let go of everything that numbs you, even the parts that make you feel good temporarily. It asks you to feel again, deeply, without filters or shortcuts. And that's the hardest thing for the modern human to do, to feel without distraction. Because feeling means facing the truth. And truth doesn't flatter the ego, it breaks it. But the ego needs to break. It's not who you are, it's who you thought you needed to be to survive. And once it breaks, what emerges is something extraordinary. Authenticity. Authenticity is not a performance, it's presence. It's saying, this is me, without needing approval. It's living in alignment, not perfection. It's freedom disguised as simplicity. But simplicity terrifies the modern mind because it can't be monetized. Peace doesn't sell, stillness doesn't trend. That's why the system keeps you busy. It's easier to control people who are tired and distracted. If you want to reclaim your mind, you must first reclaim your attention. Attention is the new currency of consciousness. Where you place it determines the world you live in. If your attention is fragmented, so is your reality. Start noticing what steals your focus. Is it your phone, your fears, other people's opinions? Because wherever your attention goes, your energy follows, and energy is life. If you give your energy to noise, your life becomes noise. If you give it to silence, your life becomes clarity. That's the hidden secret of dark psychology. Not manipulation of others, but mastery of self. To know your triggers, to understand your emotional patterns, to stop being predictable, because once you're no longer predictable, you're no longer programmable. That's what real intelligence looks like. Not accumulation of facts, but awareness of self. Awareness sharpens perception. It reveals the invisible patterns that rule your life. It shows you how every reaction, every emotion, every craving has roots in your past. And when you begin to see those roots, you can finally choose instead of repeat. That's the beginning of freedom. Conscious choice. Most people never get there because they're too busy surviving. But survival mode was never meant to last forever. It's supposed to keep you alive, not define your life. So if you feel like you're living the same day over and over again, it's because the system wants you predictable. Predictable minds buy predictable things. Predictable people follow predictable paths. And nothing terrifies the system more than a person who starts thinking for themselves. Thinking is the last rebellion. In a world addicted to noise, thought is an act of courage, because to think means to pause, and to pause means to see. And once you see, you can't go back to blindness. So maybe the question isn't how to escape the system, but how to awaken within it. To walk through the noise and remain untouched, to live in the storm without letting it live inside you. Because the truth is, the world may never slow down, but you can. And when you do, you realize the noise was never around you. It was inside you. And once the noise inside you fades, you begin to hear something else. Something ancient, something sacred. The quiet hum of your own consciousness. The reminder that beneath all the chaos, you were always free. There comes a moment, after the noise fades, when you no longer know who you are. You look in the mirror, and for the first time, you don't recognize the reflection, the old self. The one that chased approval, escaped silence, and lived in distraction, is gone. But the new self hasn't arrived yet. And in between, there's emptiness. That emptiness is sacred. It's the space between destruction and creation. It's where transformation truly begins. Most people fear it. They mistake it for depression, isolation, or failure. But what they're really feeling is rebirth, the uncomfortable space where your soul is building a new home inside you. You see, awakening isn't glamorous. It's not all light and peace. It's raw, disorienting, lonely. Because to become whole, you must first break apart. The ego resists, clinging to its old identities, whispering that you need to go back to normal. But there is no going back. Once you've seen the truth, illusion can't seduce you anymore. And yet, that's where the beauty lies, in the ruins of who you once were. That's where the rebuilding starts. You begin to see life differently. You start noticing things you once ignored. The way sunlight hits a wall, the sound of your own breathing, the simplicity of being. It's almost like reality becomes clearer, sharper, more honest. Because now you're not seeing it through the filters of expectation, and you're seeing it as it is. In that clarity, something profound happens. You stop chasing and you start observing. The obsession to fix, prove, or achieve slowly fades. You realize the universe doesn't demand performance. It asks for presence. And presence, though simple, is the hardest thing for a human to master. The modern world taught you to run from discomfort, to escape boredom, to fill silence. But when you finally stop running, you realize that peace isn't something you find, it's what's left when you stop avoiding yourself. Peace is the residue of acceptance. It's what remains when the war inside you ends. You start to forgive yourself, not because you've forgotten what you did, but because you understand why you did it. You see how your wounds shaped your patterns, how your fears became your decisions, and instead of judging your past self, you begin to hold it with compassion. That's the beginning of emotional intelligence, not the ability to control emotions, but to understand them, to realize that every feeling has a message. Fear says, protect me. Anger says, respect me. Sadness says, release me. And love says, remember me. You start to realize that love was never something you needed to get. It was something you forgot to give yourself. And once you begin to give it, life starts changing. Not because the world becomes easier, but because your perception becomes kinder. That's the paradox of healing. The world stays chaotic, but you stop needing it to be calm for you to feel peace. You become the calm. People will notice. They'll sense something different in you. A softness in your presence, a strength in your silence. You won't react the same way you used to. The little things that once stole your peace will lose their power. And that's when you understand what real power is. Not control over others, but mastery over yourself. The journey from reaction to reflection is the path of maturity. It's how consciousness evolves. It's how pain becomes wisdom. But don't expect everyone to understand your transformation. Some will resist it. Not because you've changed, but because your growth reminds them of their stagnation. When you stop playing roles, you threaten the comfort of those who still wear masks. That's why solitude remains part of the path. You will lose people you thought you'd never lose. You will outgrow conversations that once felt alive. And that's okay. Growth demands release. You can't step into your next chapter while clinging to the last one. One day you'll wake up and realize that solitude no longer feels like loneliness. It feels like freedom. You'll enjoy your own company because it's no longer a cage, it's a temple. That's when you understand what presence truly means. It's not about escaping the past or fearing the future. It's about coming home to yourself again and again, no matter how far you wander. And once you return home, you begin to see others differently too. You no longer look at people as broken or wrong. You see them as reflections of where they are in their journey. You stop taking things personally. You realize that everyone's fighting a war you can't see. That realization is the birth of compassion, not the sentimental kind, but the kind that comes from deep understanding. It's the awareness that judgment is easy when you've never carried someone else's pain. And suddenly, instead of reacting with anger, you start responding with empathy. Empathy doesn't mean weakness, it means strength of perception. It means you've expanded your consciousness enough to understand that hurt people, not because they're evil, but because they're unaware. When you see that clearly, you no longer waste energy trying to change others. You focus on healing yourself, because healed people naturally inspire healing. That's how light spreads, not by preaching, but by presence. And in that quiet presence, life begins to feel different. You no longer need to chase intensity to feel alive. You find beauty in simplicity, in conversations that feel real, in moments of silence that don't feel awkward, in small acts of kindness that go unnoticed. You begin to live slower, not because you've given up, but because you finally understand that speed was never the goal. Peace was. It's strange, but how once you stop fighting life, life stops fighting you. Synchronicities appear, opportunities flow. You begin to attract what aligns with your peace instead of your wounds. You stop asking, what do I want? And start asking, what's meant for me when I'm being true? Because truth has a frequency, and it attracts what resonates with it. But truth also requires courage, the courage to say no when everyone expects a yes, the courage to be misunderstood, the courage to live honestly even when it costs comfort. That's the price of authenticity. And the reward is liberation. When you no longer pretend, when you no longer wear a mask to be loved, you start feeling something rare in this world. Peace that doesn't depend on anything. And from that peace, creativity is born again. Not the creativity of performance, but the creativity of expression. You start to create because it brings you alive, not because it brings you validation. You write, paint, speak, move freely, without the weight of expectation. The essence of being human, to create meaning from chaos, to transform pain into art, to turn silence into music. And as you create, you heal. Because creation is how the soul speaks when words fail. The more you live from that space, the less you fear what others think. You stop trying to fit into a world you were meant to expand. You stop proving, competing, performing. You simply are. And in that being, you rediscover joy. Not the loud kind, but the quiet one that sits softly in your chest. The kind that doesn't depend on circumstances. The kind that whispers, I'm alive and that's enough. That's the mind at peace. Not empty, but full of clarity. Not detached, but deeply connected. When you reach that place, you finally understand. Healing was never about becoming perfect. It was about becoming whole. There comes a moment after all the storms when you no longer search for meaning, you simply live it. When you stop asking why everything happened the way it did, and instead you start to see how it all shaped you into who you are. The scars no longer burn. They begin to glow. The pain no longer defines you. It refines you. You realize that the point was never to escape the darkness, but to carry light into it. Because without the darkness, you would never know the depth of your own radiance. For most of your life, you were taught that strength means resistance, that winning means control. But now you understand true strength is surrender. It's the ability to let go and trust that even in the fall there's wisdom, even in the silence there's guidance, even in the endings there's rebirth. And so you stop trying to fix everything. You stop trying to control every outcome. You stop demanding certainty from a life that was never meant to be predictable. You begin to flow. That's the word that defines awakening. Flow. The ability to move through joy and pain, success and loss, love and solitude, without resistance. The ability to let things come and let them go, not because you don't care, but because you finally trust. Trust is the final lesson of consciousness. Trust in the unseen, in the timing, in the invisible intelligence that orchestrates what your logic can't comprehend. You've seen how forcing things breaks them. Now you begin to see how allowing them makes them bloom. The human mind was never meant to control life. It was meant to witness it, to observe, to feel, to learn, to grow. And when the mind returns to that sacred role, life stops being a battle and becomes a dance. You begin to notice the rhythm, how loss leads to understanding, how stillness opens the heart, how pain polishes the soul until it becomes transparent enough for light to shine through. It's all connected. Every heartbreak, every failure, every tear, none of it was wasted. It all had a purpose, to bring you home to yourself. And when you finally come home, you understand that peace was never somewhere else. It was within you, buried under the noise, waiting to be remembered. That's the beauty of awakening. You don't gain something new. You remember what was always there. You remember that you are not your thoughts, not your fears, not your past. You are the awareness behind it all. The silent witness, the observer, the light that never flickered. And that awareness changes everything, because once you see yourself as awareness, you stop chasing identity. You no longer need to prove who you are. You simply are. You no longer seek validation. Your existence is validation enough. You look at the world with new eyes. You see the same chaos, the same madness, the same noise, but it no longer pulls you in, because you see through it. You see the pain behind people's anger, the fear behind their arrogance, the longing behind their hate. And instead of judging, you start to understand. You realize that awakening isn't separation, it's compassion. The more awake you become, the softer you get. Not weak, but gentle. Because you know how heavy it feels to be asleep. You stop arguing with the world. You stop trying to convince anyone of anything. You just live your truth quietly, consistently, like a candle that refuses to go out, even when surrounded by wind, and people will feel it. They may not understand it, but they'll sense something in your presence, a calmness that can't be faked, a steadiness that can't be taught. That's the power of inner alignment. You no longer need to speak loudly because your silence now carries meaning. You no longer need to prove because your energy already communicates everything. This is what it means to become whole, not perfect, not enlightened, but real, fully human, fully aware, fully alive. You begin to realize that spirituality isn't an escape from life. It's a deeper immersion into it. You still feel sadness, but it doesn't consume you. You still feel anger, but it doesn't control you. You still feel fear, but it doesn't stop you, because emotions no longer rule you, they serve you. They become guides instead of jailers. You learn to move with them instead of against them. And suddenly life begins to feel like a symphony, sometimes loud, sometimes soft, but always meaningful. That's when gratitude arises, or not the kind you post online, but the quiet kind that sits in your heart when you look around and realize, I made it through all of that, and I'm still here. Gratitude becomes your natural state because you see that nothing was random. Every heartbreak carved space for compassion. Every failure built endurance. Every delay protected you from something not meant for you. You stop labeling things as good or bad. You see everything as necessary. And in that acceptance you find liberation. You realize you don't need to fix the world. You just need to stop feeding its chaos. The more peace you embody, the more peace you bring into the collective. That's how humanity heals, not through grand revolutions, but through millions of silent awakenings happening inside ordinary lives. The greatest rebellion now is kindness, not naive kindness, but conscious kindness, the kind that sees through illusions and still chooses love, not the romantic fantasy, but the force that holds everything together. Love that forgives, love that lets go, love that endures, love that simply is. When love becomes your nature again, you stop searching for meaning, you become meaning. You stop fearing death, you understand it, because you've already died 1,000 times to everything false. And what remains after all those deaths is eternal. You realize that awakening is not a destination, it's a cycle. Over and over you'll break, heal, grow, and shed again. Every ending will bring a beginning. Every loss will bring understanding. That's the rhythm of existence, not linear, but spiral. You don't go back. You evolve in circles, each time wiser, freer, softer. And that's enough. You no longer chase eternity. You embrace impermanence. You no longer crave perfection. You honor progress. You no longer wait for peace. You are peace. You walk slower now. You breathe deeper. You listen more. You say less. You no longer rush toward the future. You let it come to you. And in that stillness, life finally begins to reveal itself, not as something to conquer, but as something to experience. You start noticing the little miracles again, the way the wind touches your skin, the laughter of a stranger, the smell of rain, the quiet hum of existence. You realize that heaven was never a place to reach. It was the consciousness you bring into the moment you're in. And with that realization, the search ends. Not because you've found everything, but because you've stopped losing yourself. Now you live differently. You love differently. You think differently. You move through the world like someone who has seen the illusion dissolve, and chosen peace anyway. And that perhaps is the highest form of intelligence, not knowing everything, but understanding enough to be kind. Because in the end, it was never about becoming perfect. It was about remembering how to be human, conscious, connected, compassionate, and free. So when the world tries to pull you back into noise, remember, silence is still your home. When fear tries to cloud your mind, remember, awareness is still your light. And when you forget who you are, close your eyes, breathe, and listen. Because beneath all the stories, the names, the memories, there's a quiet truth that never changed. You are the observer. You are the awareness.
You are the stillness behind it all, and that was all you ever needed to remember. The human mind was once a sanctuary, and now it's a battlefield, a war between who we truly are and who the world expects us to be. We wake up, scroll, compare, envy, perform, and call it a normal day. But nothing about this is normal. Nothing about living for attention feels natural to the soul. We are intelligent creatures trapped in emotional loops. We chase pleasure because we fear stillness.
We chase attention because we fear invisibility, and in that endless chase we forget what it means to truly feel alive. The tragedy is not that people are lost, it's that they don't even know they are. There's a story that plays in the background of every modern life. I must be more, I must do more, I must have more. But nobody asks why. Why do we need to prove our worth every single day? Why do we measure ourselves by numbers on a screen, by faces that don't even know us? Maybe it's because somewhere deep down we're terrified of being ordinary, because being ordinary feels like being unseen. But the truth is, being unseen is the birthplace of clarity. When the world stops looking at you, you start seeing yourself. We were born into a psychological illusion, the belief that happiness is out there, in the next success, in the next body, in the next relationship. But every time we get there, it fades, because happiness was never a destination, it was an awareness, and awareness demands stillness, something modern minds can't handle. You see, our brains haven't evolved for this pace of existence. The nervous system is ancient. It still thinks danger lives in the forest. But now, danger lives in notifications, deadlines, and opinions. We've built an artificial jungle, and our instincts are still trying to survive in it. So, we scroll. We distract. We consume. Because to pause would mean to face ourselves. And there's nothing more terrifying than that. But facing yourself is not punishment, it's awakening. The discomfort you feel when you're alone is not loneliness. It's withdrawal from the addiction of validation. It's your true self asking for attention. If you can sit in silence long enough to hear your own thoughts, you'll notice how much of what you think isn't even yours. Voices of parents, teachers, influencers, society, all echoing in your head, telling you who to be, what to want, how to behave. You call it personality, but it's programming. And maybe that's the cruelest part of modern psychology. We built a world where self-awareness is marketed as rebellion. Be yourself, they say, but only if it fits the algorithm. We sell authenticity now. We brand individuality. Even freedom became a trend. The human psyche wasn't made to sustain this kind of duality. We are social creatures with existential hunger. We crave meaning, not entertainment. But meaning doesn't trend. Meaning is quiet, subtle, slow. And we forgot how to wait for anything that doesn't come instantly. You might wonder why this matters. Why think so deeply in a world that rewards shallowness? Because when we stop thinking, someone else starts thinking for us. When we stop questioning, we become part of a system designed to keep us obedient. The modern cage isn't made of bars, it's made of comfort. Comfort keeps you quiet. Comfort kills the need to evolve. And yet beneath the surface, a small voice whispers, "This can't be all there is." You've heard it. Maybe in the middle of the night, when the glow of your phone fades. Maybe when you look at a sunset and feel something ancient inside you stir. That whisper is your mind remembering what the soul already knows. You were not born to repeat patterns. You were born to awaken from them. The problem is, awakening hurts. To see clearly means to lose illusions, and we love our illusions. They make the pain look beautiful. But every illusion has an expiration date. At some point, reality arrives, and it demands your presence. The reason people fear silence, solitude, or shadow work is because in that space you meet your unfiltered truth. And truth is heavy at first. It dismantles everything fake you've built to survive. But once the dust settles, there's peace. Not the kind that comes from escaping pain, the kind that comes from understanding it. Psychology has a word for this process, integration. But I prefer to call it remembrance, because you're not becoming someone new. You're remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Somewhere between innocence and trauma, you forgot that you were enough without the performance. You learned to smile when you wanted to scream, to agree when your heart said no, to hide your darkness because they told you it made you unlovable. But your darkness was never the problem. It was the doorway. Everything you reject about yourself becomes a shadow, and the shadow doesn't disappear. It waits. It shows up as envy, anger, fear, and control. It sabotages your happiness, not because it's evil, but because it's ignored. The parts of you that hurt just want to be seen. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That's not philosophy. That's reality. Look around. People repeating the same toxic relationships, the same jobs, the same emotional loops. They call it bad luck. It's not luck. It's unhealed psychology. The truth is, we are all just children in adult bodies, trying to finish conversations that never ended in our childhoods. Every argument is a cry for validation. Every fear of abandonment is a memory of being unseen. Every addiction is an attempt to fill a void that love should have filled. And yet we call it personality. We label it just who I am. But it's not who you are, it's what happened to you. If you could strip away the ego, the image, the defense mechanisms, you'd find a softness underneath and something raw and honest. That is your true self. It's fragile, yes, but it's also divine. And it's been waiting for you to stop running. You don't need more motivation, you need more awareness. You don't need more positivity, you need more truth. Because real growth doesn't come from pretending to be happy. It comes from understanding why you're not. The mind is not your enemy, but it can be your prison. Most people live as prisoners of their own thoughts, chained to beliefs that were never theirs to begin with. They think they're free because they can choose their coffee flavor or phone color. But mental freedom begins where conformity ends. Every time you question a thought, you weaken the chain. Every time you pause before reacting, you reclaim power. Every time you choose reflection over distraction, you take one step closer to your authentic self. That's what thinking truly is, not overanalyzing, but seeing what is without the distortion of what you wish it to be. And in that seeing, there's liberation. But liberation is uncomfortable. It demands that you outgrow people, environments, and versions of yourself. And growth often feels like loss before it feels like freedom. So if you feel lost, anxious, disconnected, don't rush to fix it. Sit with it. Because that feeling is not a flaw, it's a signal. The system taught you to pathologize discomfort, but discomfort is where the truth begins. We've created a culture that medicates emotion instead of understanding it. We call sadness, depression, anger toxicity, solitude isolation. But these are not diseases or gyat, they are messages. Each emotion is a language your soul uses to communicate with you, and ignoring that language is like silencing your own intuition. When you feel sadness, it's your heart saying something needs to change. When you feel anger, it's your boundaries screaming, "You've been silent too long." When you feel anxiety, it's your spirit whispering. You're living out of alignment. Instead of numbing the symptom, ask what it's trying to teach you. Because every emotion, even the dark ones, are sacred teachers. The real danger of modern psychology isn't that people suffer, it's that they suffer unconsciously. They suffer without learning, without growing. Pain becomes a pattern instead of a passage. But when you face pain with awareness, it transforms. Suffering ends when understanding begins. And maybe that's what being human truly means. To hurt deeply, to love foolishly, to lose everything and still choose to hope. To know darkness intimately, but never let it make you cruel. To walk through your own shadow and still choose light. Because in the end, the goal isn't to escape your mind, it's to make peace with it, to understand that the voice inside your head isn't your enemy, it's your guide. It just speaks in riddles until you listen. So, stop running from the silence. Let it speak. Let it tell you what you've ignored for too long. Because the moment you truly listen, not to the world, but to yourself, is the moment you wake up. And once you wake up, you can never go back to sleep again.